Dr. Sylvia Maracle is Wolf Clan member from Tyendinaga Mohawk Territory who has resided in Toronto for 50 years. She's a passionate advocate for urban peoples and women's issues. Not done yet, sorry. She's at the forefront of change, fundamentally altering the landscape for urban Aboriginal programs and policies. She works with the National Association of Friendship Centres, the Native Women's Association of Canada, the Assembly of First Nations, National Aboriginal Head Start, and a long list of regional, international, and locally renowned organizations. Sylvia, thank you for being with us.
If I stand up, I might speak shorter. So I'm going to try standing up for a little while. First, I want to acknowledge the territory, the three host nations who seem to get along here. You can't put three of our host nations too close to each other where I come from. So, and Russell and I were talking earlier. Why did they bring two Mohawks out here to talk about this? And our conclusion was you wanted it fast and straightforward about what the options are. So we're going to try to do that, and I'll try to be a bit shorter. Most people think they know a lot about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And you've heard about it, or you feel like you should know it, and it's an important document, but very few of us read it. And so the back of those books on the table is in fact what the United Nations approved. Canada did not approve it until June 21st of 21. 4 nations voted against it. You probably can understand why when I tell you their names. Besides Canada, United States, New Zealand, and Australia, who have the most to lose in terms of Indigenous rights. It's claimed to be a human rights issue, but it actually, for us, is Indigenous rights. And so we've come at the picture sort of very differently. And one of the things that we'll probably both say to you tonight is there's actually the question we were asked is about the future. At a minimum of 80% of us live off reserve. We live in urban towns. We always did. As a very young person, in the 1970s, when we were getting our anger up and our roots planted, we had the opportunity when elders were starting to come together in the prairies, in particular in Alberta, and there was a chief named Chief John Snow. And Chief John Snow ended up writing a book, and he talked about he was talking about the gatherings of bringing elders together and waking them up, and young people going to the gatherings and being woken up and thinking, why didn't we know all this stuff? We didn't know that stuff because they took it out of our residential school parents, and it couldn't be handed on to us. Anyway, his book was called These Mountains Are Sacred Places. And they were having the gathering in the foothills in southern Alberta, and people were coming all over. Young people were coming from all over. And it took me a very long time to understand the concept. And the concept was, we've always been here. You've always, from the beginning of time, lived in what's now called Vancouver. You heard great stories about it. Well, Toronto, or anybody here from Toronto? Toronto, right, was the name that it was given. We were always there. Why would we have, when we lived here before those boats came over, not have lived in the best places? We go, oh, that's too pretty. We're not going to live there. No, didn't happen. We said, hey, this is nice. We like this. And we're staying. We're this land, right? And we have the role to caretake it. So we go through periods of time where we have not had honest and truthful relationships with each other, right? Tyendinaga was created. The deal was that this not Indigenous person. I try not to be too racist. It's hard on the kids' ears. And so it was. It's named after Joseph Brand. His brother-in-law, John Desrantonio, said, "You're a fool to keep going on up Lake Ontario." And so we got his name as the name of our community. And how we got the name was, it was what that the warriors, and don't think that warriors can be replaced by the word men. Okay, we have pure matriarchs, us. Okay, the name, the clan, it goes through our mothers. And basically, most of us know who our mother is. We don't always know the other half. So the other half left town for some reason. So it was agreed that they would, whatever land they could use in a day was how much land. So the warriors ran 44 square miles, which I think is a lot of running. And but the reserve kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. But the population kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's the phenomena for all of us. These beautiful places that we have, aren't the way that we should be caretaking for them. So the point in some of this is the notion of greed and power. And so in order to, we want a notion of go hunt with it. We want the great peace to be with us. And that's what some of this came to be. And it was a lot of work, led very much by people here in Canada and the US, because of where is the United Nations? And it was passed. It took 20 some years for Canada to catch up. And it has a series of articles. But in these articles, you need to read them. And it talks about that we have individual and collective rights. Individual and collective rights. And you need to think about that, because you all have free will as individuals. So if you don't like what's going on, we have an obligation to creation to say, hey, this is not happening in a good way. We don't need to have a whole bunch of our people in East Hastings. We don't need to be moving people from Alberta and Saskatchewan out here, because supposedly it's warmer out here. But it's been warmer in Toronto. But my friend here told me you dropped 14 degrees today. It's not warmer anymore. So in this declaration, we find ourselves with a number of opportunities. And we, as urban-based people, right? I've lived in Toronto for a long time. I went to Toronto to go to school. I finished school several times over. And I'm still there. And I believe that regardless of what organization, right, that we all have this free will, that we have an obligation to exercise it. So it says that in this, it says that Indigenous people and individuals are free and equal to all other people and have the right to be free from discrimination. I think that many of the laws in Canada, particularly the Indian Act, is in fact a discriminatory piece of legislation. It's not a freeing one. I don't have free will under it. It's interesting because it applies equally in Canadian law, in the enabling legislation, to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. But then, if you're Métis, why didn't you get land back? If you're Inuit, why are your settlements not your settlements? It talks about the right we have to fully participate as we choose political, economic, social, and cultural life. You are an urban Indigenous community. Why do we not just state, we choose this? This is what we've chosen. We can identify ourselves beyond just being, a political group created by a piece of legislation into a proper body politic where we are literally self-determined. And we've created organizations and agencies which UNDRIP says we should do, that we're free to do. See all these little sticky things here? It's a big list, but I want to tell you a couple of really important ones to you as urban people. The thing is that if you go to the Supreme Court now, it's 8 years in waiting and 6 years to get a decision. So if we have 14 years where we're doing nothing, we should try that. It is very, very clear that as people, we have the right to create such organizations and agencies as we need to define ourselves and rally ourselves as a community. So you, as the National Urban Indigenous Coalitions at this conference, whether you're talking about Vancouver proper, whether you're talking about British Columbia, or you're talking nationally, you have the right to do that. And all you have to do is exert yourselves. Right? Say, this is what we're doing. We're doing this. And we don't have to ask anybody else. We do not have to ask the AFN. We do not have to ask the Métis National Council. We do not have to ask ITK. We can be collectives and individuals on our own. There's nothing in that piece of international law that says we can't. It's so important. I'm trying to be short here, and I apologize if I'm going too fast. In the preamble in January 21, June 21st of the preamble to the UNDRIP enabling legislation talked about, and I was part of a committee that asked for this. I have to be honest with you. So it's about thinking outside the box. Throw the damn box away. Make yourself a circle if you want a circle. I don't even care if it's a longhouse and we dance that way because we have longhouses. We'll do whatever. We choose to go counterclockwise just because it screws up all the right. Just a simple thing. So we ask, and they put in UNDRIP, it says Indigenous people, Indigenous elders, And then we added to Canada's legislation by saying youth, children, women, men, persons with disability, and two-spirited people. It's got to be about all of us. It can't just be a traditional male-dominated, which law is. There is no justice in law. So if it's just that we can exercise our human rights as individuals and as collectives and call ourselves an urban Indigenous community, then the government should be reacting to that. All of the governments. As opposed to beating us down and saying you have no legal standing. I'm standing right here. I got a beeper that goes off every once in a while, and I have to tell it I'm still alive. In some communities, yes. It's issues that we have inherited, our children in care, right? Poor health, poor mental health, lack of employment, lack of recognition of gifts that people have been given that we can include. All of those have been isolated and make us more isolated. And all of a sudden we find ourselves unwittingly saying, I have no power. In that piece from the UN and in the enabling legislation in Canada, there is absolutely nothing than federal politics around money that go to certain national Indigenous organizations and don't want to give it to you at the grassroots. So stand up, take your place, take your power back, and everybody gets on the bandwagon. I believe that Indigenous child welfare, however we define Indigenous, is our special on CTV on Friday coming up this week, and it's looking very much at that the system is broken and that our children who have multi-needs become the cash cow in the relationship. Unfortunately, they're not getting help, but it is an economic driver for mainstream. So I'm pretty sure it's Friday, and I know it's an hour special, and you may see somebody who you've met tonight.
Can't wait.
Okay, me next. Again, I'll always have questions for everybody because I'm a political runner, independent Indigenous advocate, Leona Brown. I ran for mayor last year, and it was very interesting to learn the politics behind the colonized wording that everybody uses in the system. I'm very interested, and I would like you to repeat, Sylvia, that part about if I could stand up as an individual and say, I don't like this. Can you do something about it as a Indigenous UNDRIP right for me? Because I want to utilize that in these political forums that I get into. And I want to try to figure out how to use this to get Ken Sims out of office because he forced the police back into schools without any consultation from anybody. He ignored everybody. So I feel that what he's doing is reckless in the city. And there has to be a way for us to stand up and say, I need you to be accountable for your actions. So how do I do that under what you said? Can you repeat that, please? Thank you.
Sure. So there are 46 articles in UNDRIP. You'll find in the first couple of articles, it clearly says that the application is individual and collective rights, and that it's their job, they have a job to do. And that was confirmed. You're having an urban conference, and I know a fair bit about urban history. In 1960, through till 1968, there was presentations by a man named Walter Curry and a variety of other people, including people from here, to the Standing Committee on Indian Affairs. And at the Standing Committee, they were arguing then, and in a report, and I actually have the report, it was the Indian Affairs Standing Committee. And I have the report, and it listed 7 areas of consideration that they had heard about. One of them was urban. And Walter Curry at the time was a teacher, and he was from southwestern Ontario, Windsor, right? And it talked about education, land, economic development, services, and it talked about urban. And that Standing Committee for those years put urban development in, and you're still looking for it, and you don't get funding. And that is an issue. And so there is an opportunity, and I don't disagree with anything that was said, except that you're facing a conversation about you don't get any resources, and therefore people who need it don't get services in urban areas. And that's how. Well, you declare yourself individually or collectively and saying, we want to do this. And you use their own words, however misguided their words are, against them. And if all else fails, put your paddles in the canoe and get ready for a long Supreme Court process. Well, I do that. We used to do that all the time. We were talking, we were the demonstration population for a long time. We could, one thing that Mohawks like to do is blockade or demonstrate, bit of threatening now and then too. But those are things that catch attention, and mainstream media loves nothing better than there to be some chaos because they have something to report on. And whether that works in Vancouver or whether it works in Halifax or wherever, there are impacts of that. And you at least get your issues in front and center. And that's the thing, is we have so many problems now. It's hard to get attention. And so, I encourage you to do it. The National Association of Friendship Centers, so I was involved with for a very long time, we took at every annual meeting, we picked something that we would go and take to the streets. And, 800-900 people walking along raises questions in people's mind, doesn't it? So go back to old style.
Thank you. I do have a question, actually. So we have recently been understanding the impact of Miswadas and the distinction uniquely of urban identity. We also recognize that there are other players in the game, so to speak. Would you mind, either of you, actually responding to how do you think that we, moving forward in creating relationships and perhaps if you could provide your insight on how we might do that in the best way to be able to create relationships moving forward in terms of, putting pressure on the government, or the best way of being able to formulate those structures in moving forward? Or formulate those relationships, not structures, I meant.
Well, sometimes it is structures. So I had a long career in urban and services, and I really honestly believe you can't just accept how they do business. So we have, I work for the Friendship Centers, the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centers. They have a fair budget considering their provincial territorial group, service group. And we did it because we didn't accept the systems of a contribution agreement and a grant, and it had to be longer term. We created our own strategy in ending violence against Indigenous women and girls 20 years before we had a national inquiry. And we asked for it to be evergreen funding. The chief said, well, what about men? And we said, well, you're almost all men. What about you? You know, if you got a good plan, let's talk about it. We created a program, you know, called I'm a kind man. So rather than her having to have all the responsibility to, you know, to go to programming, to, you know, take care of the kids, to do all kinds of things, what were they doing? We got it put in the jails, and a whole bunch of people have come out, and they're like, it's always about shifting the outside edges. For a very long time, we have created allies in very powerful places, and every once in a while, somebody gets elected as the premier, and we're off to the races for a little while, you know, for 4 years or 5 years. We were able, you know, we were asked one time, well, how much money do you need for this initiative? And it was a woman who we worked with for a long time that I had met, you know, in education discussions in Toronto. And she became premier. And I said, $100 million a year, just boom, like that. I had no friggin' idea if 100 million, I just knew it wasn't 20. Yeah. You know, and I don't think she would have given us $1 billion, but we got it. And there's a whole initiative tied to that. That rippled into child welfare, into education, into, you know, Indigenous sensitivity awareness training, in different health processes, in the recognition of traditional midwives, in legislation. Like, it goes and goes and goes, but it is about relationship. I agree with both aspects of the conversation. It is about relationships. But we've got to say, this is what we need. And as I said, I don't disagree with Russell. We have, but you have to be sure. And we've had conservative governments be elected in Ontario where, you know, we just about lost everything and had to start again. But the point is, you cannot give up, because there's still spirits. Our future is still coming. And we have to try as best we all can to leave them something. And if they don't have something, then let's have the scrap over it. And so I think, so it is about relationship building, but it's also about there's not a pattern cut for it. You have to look at each individual issue and how do we address it. And that's why I think it's so important that you do use some of the elements in UNDRIP, perfect or imperfect, because you don't have that kind of support. You don't have core support. You don't have operating support. You don't have public campaign supports, and everywhere. And in some places you do. And that's what you need if we're going to impact, as the last speaker was saying. We got to find the champions. We got to do the work. We have to leave marks and tracks for the people who come behind us. And don't be afraid to ask. We are so meek and mild. Part of, I suppose, the civilizing of us. Although certainly my grandmother wouldn't understand it as civilizing. And I told a story to a couple of you. My grandmother was not sent to residential school. And she, partly because she was so old, there was no residential school yet. But she raised 10 children, and those 10 children had 62 children. And we would go and see her, visit her all the time, right? Our Dada. And they gave her for her 60th anniversary or something, electricity. And they gave her a television. And so she would, you know, she didn't speak English well. She spoke English well enough to go to, do you remember an old store called Woolworths?
Mhm.
You know, to get her bloomers laid out in a big flat thing. We didn't hide anything in those days. Anyway, there was only one or two channels, and she was saying, what is that man talking about? And we said, we were looking at each other because nobody knew how to say the news in Mohawk. We didn't know what the word for news was. So my older cousins answered her, he's talking about what's going on out there. And she said, what? And so we were trying to explain it to her, you know, like 12 maybe. And she goes, no, what's this? And I said, oh, reading. You know, I know how to say reading because we had to do it at school, right? And she said, you mean he doesn't know what he's talking about? And I said, no, it's a paper. It's like a, you know, a book, a paper. She said, pay attention. She had about 5 or 6 of us laying around on the floor where the television was. And she said, if you kids don't know what you're talking about, don't go there. And it impacted on me. I actually studied journalism as an undergraduate. It really impacted on me. If I didn't know what I was talking about, don't go somewhere. So if I didn't understand what they were framing for me, then I reframed it for us. And that's what you have to do. We have to reframe it. And I think that's very much as well what Mr. Diamond was telling us as well. Reframe it.